Okay, let's get started. Good morning and welcome everyone. I'm Zane Dames, the Marketing and Events Manager at Digital, and I'm pleased to welcome you back to our first webinar of the year. Today's topic, funding innovation, protecting and monetizing your intellectual property. As myself and much of the digital team are based in Vancouver, British Columbia, we respectfully acknowledge that we work, learn and live on the traditional ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared with our audiences in the coming week. If at any point during the session you have a question, please type it into the chat and we'll address them at the end during the Q&A portion. That's it from me, and I'll be handing it over to Jen, our Director of Intellectual Property, to get this webinar started. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks so much, Sine. Bonjour, everyone, and welcome to the first of this year's webinar series. It's wonderful having attendees from across the country for this month's Thought Leadership Power Hour. And whether you're new or you're returning as one of the over 1,000 participants who joined us last year, thank you for those of you that are back with us. We're thrilled you're here today. Next slide, please. IP is a valuable asset that can provide a competitive advantage, generate revenue, and attract investment. However, developing an IP portfolio and strategically leveraging it can be complex and costly. As a result, within the Canadian innovation landscape, there are different supports in the IP ecosystem and tailored programs which have been created to help organizations navigate the complexities and costs of IP development and to leverage their IP assets to advance their business interests. Over these next 60 minutes, we'll explore select funding options available in Canada to support the development of IP portfolios and strategies, leveraging IP to secure investment, and some success factors and real-world examples for actionable insights for organizations, with a Q&A portion to close us out. Fundamental to the global innovation clusters is collaborative innovation, setting the framework for projects that address cross-industry challenges while creating technology products and services that can scale across industries and ultimately across the world. Digital's IP strategy supports the development, ownership, and retention of Canadian IP through numerous vehicles, and information sessions with thought leaders like we've today are one example of that. Next slide, please. I have the pleasure of introducing today's panel. Please join me in welcoming Rula Thomas, Lali Rementia, and Matthew Lariviere. Rula is a registered Canadian and U.S. patent agent since 2001. And has been practicing IP law for over 25 years in biotechnology and life sciences, and has worked in private practice at leading multinational law firms, advising and supporting the IP portfolios of large R&D organizations, academic institutions, as well as SMEs. In 2016, she joined the NRC as a senior member of the IP team, and in 2022 as director of the IP Assist program at NRC IRAP, where she developed, deployed, and successfully led a national program aimed at supporting high-growth SMEs with IP. Currently, Rula is leader of the IP team at NRC and manages a professional team that oversees the Government of Canada's largest IP portfolio. Lali is managing partner, IP-backed financing at BDC Capital, and oversees a national team that helps IP-rich companies become global leaders by accelerating their growth and commercialization of their innovation. With nearly 2 decades of experience as an investment and financial executive in the tech sector, her previous roles include Chief Financial Officer and President and CEO at Quantius, and VP Finance roles at Nulogy, Lavalife, and Lucent Technologies. She's also board chair of the Canadian neurotech company Interaxon, an associate fellow at the Creative Destruction Lab, and former Canadian lead for the $1 billion Fund for Women, as well as board member with organizations that include the Innovation Asset Collective and Canadian Women in Communications. And last but not least, Matthew, currently manager of the Elevate IP program, which helps business accelerators and incubators across the country to provide the tools Canadian startups need to understand, strategically manage, and leverage their IP. With nearly 2 decades of delivering programs and helping Canadian businesses, the environment, and broader Canadian public, he's also designed and developed and managed some of the largest programs offered by the Government of Canada, including the Eco Energy for Biofuels program, the Electric Vehicle and Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Deployment Initiative, Expanding Market Opportunities program, and Green Freight program. We have a powerhouse panel with us today. And with that, let's kick off today's discussion. Rula, I'd like to start with you. Perhaps you can walk the audience through sort of describing some of the rationale for the government in developing these IP funding and support programs.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks, Jen, for that introduction. And thank you for this invitation. I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit of my insights on the IP ecosystem. So if we can just rewind a few years, the question being, what's the rationale for the government to have launched and developed all these innovation supporting programs, IP supporting programs? In the year, in 2018, sounded like I was going down a really long story there, but in 2018, the government of Canada launched what was called Canada's IP strategy. And that IP strategy was really a strategy aimed at helping Canadian businesses, innovators, entrepreneurs, to really better understand IP, understand how to protect IP, and really give them the tools to leverage that IP for the benefit of Canadian businesses and the benefit of Canada. So 2018, the government said we need to know a little bit more about IP. So they launched programs to raise awareness about IP. Some of them were government facing, some of them were industry facing education programs. I can speak a little bit about IP Assist later on. I'm happy to answer questions on that, which was an SME facing program, industry facing program. Mathieu, I'm sure we'll talk about Explore IP and some of the programs that the government launched to help startups and early stage companies as well. But the government of Canada really wanted to make sure that our companies understood what IP was and how they might leverage and use IP as a business tool. As somebody who's been practicing IP law for about 25 years, IP needs to be really understood as a tool for business to help your business grow, to increase revenue, to secure revenue, to help your revenue streamlines, build products. And so part of that is understanding not only IP, but how to own IP and how to use it for business. And so a lot of the programs sort of took, were born out of that in mind, education, and then layering on IP strategy. So now I understand a little bit more about IP. I'm talking as if I'm an SME now. I understand more about IP. I understand I might need it. I understand I need to know some things about it. Now, how might I use it for my business? And that's where IP strategy comes in. And I know Lally and I have talked about this stuff a lot, and Lally will talk a little bit about the importance of having strategy for your business. And so some of these programs were focused on education, strategy, and then helping companies, execute, take specific IP-centric actions to support their business. And so with that in mind, the IP ecosystem really started to grow. Some might say there's a little bit of confusion. I might be one of them with all of these programs. Some companies, SMEs might not know where to go. And that's why I love these sorts of sessions, because it does give companies and innovators, bearings within the IP ecosystem. So there's like Explore IP, there's a patent collective that helps SMEs, there's IP Assist that helps, and we can talk about all these programs later, that helps high growth SMEs, IRAP firms. I can talk a little bit about NRC IRAP if needed. CanExport has an IP program, and there's different than regional programs like IP Ontario or different regional innovation centers that are supported through government funding to help the innovators better understand, build a strategy, and execute on the IP actions. So that's sort of a little bit of the lay of the land. I'm hoping that informs our conversation. I'll pause there, and I think maybe Mathieu wanted to add something to that.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you very much, Rilla. So before I start, I just wanted to thank our wonderful hosts for giving us this opportunity to speak with you all. Also, je voulais soulever le point que s'il y en a de vous qui veulent demander des questions en français, ça me fait un plaisir de répondre soit en français, soit en anglais. Donc, peu importe la langue, s'il te plaît, je vous invite de demander vos questions. Mais je vais faire la majorité de la présentation en anglais. Yeah, I mean, I can definitely echo everything that Rula just said. Elevate IP was also a program that was born out of the IP strategy. Now, I'll touch on a few things. Though. Why is this important? Why is IP important? It kind of underlines why we're doing this in the first place. So there's been a lot of studies, a lot of research showing the importance of IP. Some of the little bullets that we like to tout is that high growth firms are twice as likely to own their own intellectual property. So that's kind of a key indicator to future success is owning IP. And we also, as a general rule in Canada, are wonderful at research. There's a lot of wonderful research institutes, academia, but taking that next step towards commercialization has been challenging. And we actually are ranked, so the World Intellectual Property Office has a ranking of research and then IP. And we are very well ranked in innovation inputs. So how much research are we doing as a collective? We're ranked 8th worldwide, but we fall behind when it comes to outputs. So looking at IP, looking at patents, trademarks, copyrights, we rank 25th. So we definitely fall behind. So that's one of the reasons why the programs were created. And the numbers from the World Intellectual Property Office are current. So it also underlines the point of why we're still needed, why there is still work to do. We were also given a report card of a D by the Innovation Report Card from the Conference Board of Canada on patents, copyrights, and trademarks. So there's a lot of work to do. And one little element too, I'll touch on it further, but Rula mentioned IP Assist is generally focused on SMEs, and Elevate IP is more focused on startups. So we are really trying to work to bridge that gap between academia, researchers who might want to commercialize, who see the benefit. And it's just one step that can be taken. I was in Alberta in November. We met with one of the heads of the University of Calgary, and they mentioned how they are putting in place measures to try and help as well. Every one of their students has to go through some entrepreneurial classes, so that's one way to do it. But we definitely see Elevate IP as being a key component in bridging that gap between research and then commercialization.
Perfect. Thank you both for that. And so, you know what, I think it's a good segue here, sort of, slipstreaming a bit on what you both have covered, Rula and Matthew. Maybe you can kind of walk us through sort of that overview of some of these funding and support programs that are in place with the ecosystem and how they work. So yeah, Rula, we can start with you or Matthew, between the two of you, and then kind of slipstream there.
Sure. I'll talk a little bit about IP Assist. And Matthew, I was going to assume you're going to do Explore IP, maybe Elevate, and some of the others. I'll start with IP Assist, and I think IP Assist is a great example for what other programs are doing. Very, very similar sort of pillars in the programs, mostly based on education, so IP awareness, IP strategy, and then IP execution. Starting to take action of things defined in your IP strategy. What the main difference between most of the programs is the target audience or the region. Sometimes they're like sector specific. IP Assist is not. IP Assist is very, supports any sort of innovative SME. And so the target for the IP Assist funding was to provide advice to high growth innovative SMEs. So if you're a pizzeria, you might not be considered a high growth unless you're innovating some sort of magical new dough and sauce recipe that is highly innovative. But we're talking about high growth SMEs. And so that was the target audience, the IRAP firm, which is the firm that's a little farther along. But there's, and then there was like Elevate, which was more the startup. But most of the programs, like I said, focused on those three pillars: educating the SME, meeting them where they are. I sometimes refer to it as giving them the right love at the right time, speaking to them in their language, So IP is I'm an IP person, and I will be the first to tell you IP is complicated to somebody who doesn't practice it on a daily basis. So really helping companies understand IP, what it means to them, and then giving them actions that they can do. My experience is, and I've seen this, leading IP Assist, and I've seen it in my current role in working with, world-class researchers across Canada that are, incredible scientists and engineers, and they know a tremendous amount of technical expertise, and they do understand IP, but there's this spectrum that of education that is needed. So I really think it's important, and I would encourage the leaders of these programs to continue to speak to the company in their language where they are, so that they can actually take that awareness and be able to apply it. And that's what we tried to do. It's a continual thing, helping companies prioritize IP. You need to make it understandable.
Matthew, do you want to jump in and share a little bit sort of from your overview on some of the ecosystem programming and how they work?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you. So Elevate IP works a little bit differently than most government programs, where we work through third-party organizations. We partner with business accelerators and incubators and collective of incubators and accelerators throughout Canada to deliver our program. So we don't directly deal with startups. It also means that the rules, the tenets of each of the programs in each province can vary a little bit, because we've given our recipients a lot of freedom in tailoring the programs to meet their audiences. So there are slight differences depending on the provinces, but very quickly in BC in the north, New Ventures is delivering the program. University of Calgary is delivering it on our behalf in Alberta. Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Ontario, it's Community Tech. Maine is doing it in Quebec, and then in the Atlantic provinces, it's Springboard. Everything's on our website, so if you didn't catch it or I was speaking a little bit too quickly, on ICED's website, if you look Elevate IP, it has links to everybody's websites. But yeah, so in general, as Rula mentioned, we deal with startups, so new companies that don't have a proven track record, that are just getting off the ground. The idea is that we provide them with education, we provide them with funding to develop IP strategies, and we provide them with funding to implement the strategies. So very similar in terms of eligible activities compared to IP Assist. A lot of the focus is on the education, because obviously often you'll get people who are less sophisticated from a business perspective. They're not as aware of IP. So that's one of the really big areas where we can hit a lot of people. So a lot of our business accelerators and incubators will do a lot of lunch and learns and presentations to try and increase awareness of IP and the importance of IP and what IP can do. And then those are good candidates to proceed further on to IP strategy development and IP strategy implementation. So that's in a nutshell, Elevate IP. We also have another program called Explore IP. I'll just touch on it really quickly. It's not a funding program, but they hate it when I call it this, but it's almost a matchmaking service. What it does is it's a repository of publicly held IP. Although they're pivoting and they're starting to include some privately held IP that was funded in part by the government. And it allows you to search the patents and be put in contact with the owner of that patent. So the idea originally was to have almost like someone who wanted to wrap their entire new company around a piece of IP that might be underused, and they could build on that. In practice, what we're finding is it's more larger companies that find that there's a bit of a gap, and they can't identify a means to fill that gap within the current market. So then they go to Explore IP, see if there's anything that is more cutting edge but close to commercialization that has been developed, and then they can see if there's potential partnerships, licensing agreements, something like that, so that they can leverage what's already been done. So it's a really great tool. My colleagues are working hard on trying to kind of modernize it, make it a little bit more accessible. But it's to me, it's a bit of a gem that is underappreciated, underutilized. So I'll just kind of throw that out there as well, beyond just Elevate IP.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
I want to mention one other program, not the IP Assist program, but Can Export also has an IP supporting program for companies that want to, secure IP in foreign markets. So as we all know, and I'm hoping that the audience knows as well, to be able to use things, you need to own them. So IP ownership is really important. Matthew gave us some statistics on how Canada and our SMEs lag in that respect, but owning your IP gives you control of your IP. And so Can Export also has an IP program. I think it's a little bit younger than some of the programs we've mentioned, but that allows companies to move outside of Canada into foreign markets. So that's another program that the audience might want to look into as well.
Perfect. Thank you both. And I know as part of sort of the follow-up, we will also include links to folks that are on the call with some of these different touch points that you both have mentioned as you kind of shape that ecosystem. And I know, yeah, definitely from Explore IP, that's also sort of part of some of the conversations that Clusters, especially digital, is having as well in terms of, how to sort of showcase sort of that funded IP development that is happening. So kind of in that thread, thank you both for sort of, providing sort of that landscape to us. Lali, I'm going to sort of shift gears slightly, and sort of, and come to you with this, as we are sort of seeing this evolution where, organizations might kind of fall in two ways, sort of in terms of, benefiting from, the breadth of what's available from a programming and resources side of things, but also, there are agencies that are providing funding to help organizations to develop their IP strategies, as Rula and Matthew have both mentioned, sort of the importance of that. So perhaps you can take a moment to walk us briefly through what an IP strategy is, why it, and, sort of more broadly, sort of, I think as Rula, you've touched upon this think IP mindset, and Mathieu has talked about, is important, and how that factors into investment decisions.
Well, thank you very much, Jen, and good morning and good afternoon to everyone. So for me, an IP strategy is simply a plan to develop, grow, leverage, protect, and monetize a company's portfolio of IP assets. And by IP, we can mean patents, designs, trademarks, trade secrets, copyright, proprietary software, data, approvals, registrations, and licenses. So it's a very broad sort of domain. As Jen said, it's important to have that think IP mindset as an investor. What we tend to look for are companies that are IP smart. So using the IP strategy and knowing that, especially for small and medium-sized companies and startups, money is tight. And therefore, being IP smart is using the IP strategy to make the most out of the tools that are available for the company, given the budgets that they may have. So to Rula's point, it's a set of tools, and the IP strategy is a way to identify how you're going to use those tools and how you're going to leverage them given the stage of the company. When we look at companies that are developing IP strategies, we tend to see these companies and require them to really show that they understand the industry, the market, and competitive forces that their business operates in. So an IP strategy in some cases could include a company's sort of plan or decision to patent a particular feature of their product and then keep something as a trade secret. Again, so it's not just the plan is to patent everything, but given our budget, given the competitive forces that we have, maybe it makes sense to invest so much in patents and then to invest so much in trade secret protection. Another component of an IP strategy could be what countries will a company file trademarks in? So where are their competitors and where are they most likely to need to protect their brand in order to be strong in their go-to-market strategy? And that's what in some cases we call the layering of the different IP rights. Cultivating a strong IP management culture, I'd say, is something that we need to see in all companies, irrespective of the sector or industry that they're in. And so how does the company create that culture? What do they plan to do in training their workforce in order to be more IP savvy or IP aware? And then another example here is plans to potentially monetize or generate revenue streams from the IP assets that they have. So companies that are looking as part of their strategies to license their patents for certain applications or for certain markets, especially those markets that they're not entering into. Everyone right now is talking about tariffs and the possible negative impact to our manufacturing sector. We're now hearing of some of these manufacturers think about doing technology transfer, licensing their IP to a US entity in order to avoid some of those tariffs. So as Ruth said, it's a tool set that companies can use, again, to meet the requirements of what's happening in their industry and the competitive forces, and obviously the strategy that they have to growing their company. As an investor, one of the things that I always look at is what kind of investment am I making? So we can be both a debt investor, so we can be lending a company money, in which case being able to get payback through future cash flows is of importance. Or we can be an equity investor, where we're willing to take on additional risk in order to participate in the appreciation of the company's value over time. IP here comes as a driver because we see that IP strategies can help, I guess, in a lot of ways to help companies generate more cash flows. So the protection of a company's product, let's say, could create a monopoly, obviously, within a particular market that protects a company's market share and helps grow it. So stabilizing and generating additional revenues from that. IP can also be used to develop processes that are proprietary to a company that helps them reduce their manufacturing costs. So again, that's another way of generating cash flow from the business. From a competitive perspective, investors tend to look at the IP portfolio as a way to create a moat around the business. So is this company doing something unique that no one else in the market is able to do, that's enabling this company to be very sticky to their customers? And then IP also creates optionality for companies. So we've made investments in companies where we look at the potential licensing revenue stream of the company's IP portfolio, because we know that over time, given substantial or even more investment, then they could increase their pie because they can capture a larger share of the market. And then lastly, I would say, obviously, IP portfolios in some cases tend to drive increased valuations if a company is being sold. I know that I was speaking to a friend of mine, they say that companies like Google, at the end of the day, if they are making a decision to acquire a company, looking at two companies, it's a company that has a stronger IP strategy, usually wins and gets acquired. And that's because there's value that's being seen in the company's IP portfolio that helps increase the chances of an M&A transaction.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you, Lali. And I think, just as we're sort of, uncovering the different pathways, of the programming and supports that are there, it's also too sort of the importance of diving into this mindset, right? And what this sort of means from an individual sort of participant to an organizational side and that piece, and the different considerations that there isn't that sort of one size fits all and kind of what that means. Maybe we can take things a little bit further in sort of the stage that you've set and really look at, with you involved sort of in that IP backed investment side, can you share how these investment decisions work? And walk us through a part of that.
Sure. So my definition of IP-backed investment or IP-backed financing is simply the attribution of value to both the tangible and intangible assets of a company. So it's taking a credit or debt underwriting process or an equity underwriting process, but then adding an additional lens of looking at the company's IP portfolio to see if that contributes to a lot of the strengths that the company already has. and also what future potential could be unleashed in this company because of that strategy that they have. So it's not for the faint of heart. And the reason I say that is because there's a lot more digging that a typical IP-backed lender or equity investor would look at. Because there's, again, that IP portfolio that needs to be understood. In cases, let's say, such as patents or trademarks, they're analyzed sometimes using big data analytics or AI. There's usually a valuation methodology that's used by the lender or the investor to, again, because to put a value to it. Now, not saying that that's ultimately the decision making sort of the set of numbers that will drive the decision making, but sometimes it does peg a range of what the perceived value of the company is, and then over time gets tracked to see if the company's IP portfolio is actually growing and if it's actually being more valuable over time. The other thing I think that's important is the level of due diligence that is required in an IP-backed transaction. So companies usually don't expect that there's a lot more questions. Surveys, questionnaires, all these are usually gathered as part of the process, because it's really trying to understand how we could take a company's IP portfolio, in most cases, let's say a patent portfolio, and map that to the different products and services that the company offers, and then the resulting cash flows that those products and services generate. And so it's a very sort of analytical way of looking at things, and then again, like, because it's not just about patents, like, you know, we also look at things such as the company's brand building activities, because again, that's a form of an intangible asset driven, let's say, by the company's trademark strategy. Strong management, the ability to be financially flexible, especially at the earlier stages of development, the presence of the ability to tackle the needs of a large and growing market, and then differentiation versus competition, all those are very important in any of these IP-backed transactions. And so we ask ourselves, how does the IP strategy and portfolio of the company add to these drivers and make them stronger? So as an example, if a company operates in a very, I'd say, trade secret rich industry, then is this company employing best practices when it comes to trade secret protection? Or are they like losing out and actually having some of their IP go leak because employees aren't trained well when it comes to speaking with potential customers or potential suppliers? The potential or additional revenue streams, we already talked about that. That's something that we look at very intently, because there's so much investment that the company has made in their intellectual property portfolio, and be able to generate more cash flows in the future could help them really have that ROI from that investment. And then the ability also for the company to make pivots. And if a company pivots, then is their IP strategy pivoting with that change in business strategy? So all of these are some of the sort of drivers that we look at when we make an investment decision, and it's a very holistic approach. The value of the IP portfolio is not the only indicator of whether we're going to be investing or not. We look at everything under the hood, but also identify the role that the company's IP portfolio plays in helping them be stronger in the future.
Thank you, Lily. Yeah, and it is this sort of this dialogue. It's iterative, and it sort of is really sort of this ongoing sort of dialogue that is happening as you're uncovering this. I have one follow-up question for you to that, but before I jump into that, Rula, was there any sort of examples or anything you wanted to expand upon from sort of what Lali has said around sort of that mindset and the strategic part and the investment decision side?
Yeah, I think that the strength of a lot of these programs is that they are really incentivizing companies to think of IP strategy. I think that's really important. like Lally said, you know, if they're going to invest in a company and the company doesn't have an IP strategy, or they have something jotted down on a napkin, like we need to file a patent to that, or we should trademark this name or whatever, that isn't really a fulsome, thought out IP strategy. It's a start of a strategy. But I think what a lot of these programs are doing, and what I'm a big advocate for, is to get companies thinking about what is the innovation or the IP. It doesn't need to be a patent. IP doesn't equal patent. What is the IP that I need to think about and leverage for my business? That's the thinking of behind strategy. Sometimes it's I need to file a patent to show potential investors that I'm investing in my company, that I have some sort of a portfolio. Maybe it's I'm in a trade in a space that's very heavy on trade secrets. I need to show that I have cybersecurity around my secrets, that I have processes in place, that I'm treating the stuff as not confidential information, but as trade secrets. And so getting companies to show that they have an IP strategy, like an actual documented deliverable, is really important. It gets them thinking about what they actually need to do. Because like what I started saying at the beginning, if IP is not being used as a business tool, it's just very expensive paper. And as an IP practitioner, I do not, filing a patent is not the first thing you want to say to most of your companies. It's how are we going to use that? Can we enforce it? Can we police it? Can we leverage it in our business? What are the business goals? Like, what are we going to do with this thing? We do that at NRC. At NRC, we carry a portfolio of over 1,900 patents. Part of our good housekeeping is to make sure that we are using that IP that we're carrying for a specific end, for a specific goal, not to just say, oh, we are amazing at metrology. We have the best technology when it comes to mining or novel antibodies or whatever it is. We operate in every research industry and sector. It's how are we using that IP? What are we doing with it? Are we licensing it to a industry partner that is going to further develop it, that's going to take it to the clinic, that's going to have what are we doing with it? And I think that's why the strategy piece is so important, because it gets companies thinking about IP as a business tool. And I'll go just one step further, because I know a lot of these programs, and for your audience's information, a lot of these programs will help companies file a patent. They will pay for you to, they'll help you, give you the funds to file IP, whether it's a trademark or a patent. But what happens when when these programs disappear with the next budget or the next government? We need to make sure that our SMEs and our companies are able to pay those bills. As a patent practitioner, I'll tell you that the cost of carrying your IP grows significantly over time. It's not a straight line, it's a curve. And so the more you have to carry and maintain your IP, if that $10,000 filing is too monumental and you have no plan to maintain or to file or nationalize in specific jurisdictions, then you're in for a really rude awakening. So we really need to get our companies thinking about ownership for the long term, not just ownership for now. Sometimes that's the play, sometimes that's the strategy, but we really want to make sure that our companies are thinking strategically about their assets and making strategic decisions, not being totally reactive and not making mistakes, right? If you don't know, sometimes you need to know what you can't do. What you need to know what your competitors are doing. And a good IP strategy provides you with that intel, tells you about your technology landscape, tells you about your competitors' landscape, that market, who's doing what? What am I doing better? What am I doing different? What do my customers need? What are my advantages? These are the sorts of things that an IP strategy needs to inform, and companies find that really valuable in making the next, second and third decisions that they need to make. So groups like Lolly's and IRAP and all the other funding programs are going to make sure that the companies they're investing in have a thought out strategy. And it's not something that they thought out 3 years ago. It's something that applies to what they're doing now, and it's relevant to the market now. So I liken an IP strategy to a garden. You need to weed it, prune it, plant the things you want to grow. And if you're not continually doing that, then you've just got a crazy backyard that you don't even want to go into, and you're paid for. So it's really important to have that strategy.
Matthew, do you want to jump in into any of this as well?
Yeah. I'd just like to say anecdotally, I've definitely heard some of our the startups that receive funding echo that same sentiment, that the importance and the value of the strategy, that in some cases there may be a thought to patent right away, but that might not be the right solution for a given situation. You might want to wait to patent just yet, or in a lot of cases, strategies will broaden their thinking, that maybe they were focused on a domestic market, but they would be better off registering a patent in the US, in the EU, and they can make better use out of that. So the idea of the strategy is to really try and look at their assets from a strategic perspective, and not just move forward where you go from A to B to C, and that's the pathway that you take.
Perfect. And so Lali, with all of this too, are you seeing, a shift with respect to the companies, that you're providing sort of this funding to, in as much, the importance of companies to have access to these programs, and how it's helpful in accessing this non-dilutive funding?
Yeah, I mean, definitely a big shift. And I look at it in two ways. So if I look at it based on just the companies that we've been meeting over the last more than 4.5 years. So we launched this fund in July 2020. I remember the first year, like we would get pitch decks from companies and there was no mention of IP. Because no one was really trained to talk about their portfolios or the strategies that they have. So you have to ask a lot of questions, because we do ask or talk about IP even in the first meeting that we have a company. And then they started putting the slides. I call it the afterthought slide, because the slide would be at the back of the deck. It would be a different font, but at least they're talking about their IP strategy and their portfolio. Now, it's almost like companies now, there's an IP slide, and it's part of the main, I guess, the main messaging of the deck. We even have companies already talking about the fact that they've received funding from IP Assist or Elevate IP, and now can talk about an IP strategy that they have. And when we're speaking with them during the meeting, then they can actually have real good conversations about their IP strategy. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the CTO. Sometimes we can actually be speaking with a CFO now, and they're actually talking about their IP strategy. The other way of looking at this is also, how about the companies that we've funded out of the IP-backed financing practice here at BDC Capital? One of the things we do require our companies is that they give us reporting on the progress that they're making in their IP development. We do realize that companies we've invested in aren't at the end state of the IP portfolio. They're really at the beginning or middle stages, and there's more development that's going to be required as soon or as much as the company is growing. So we require those reports, and what I've seen is that the sense of sort of like the oversight that we have through that reporting mechanism has now translated into companies now thinking, hey, like I'm doing these reports, maybe I should really be integrating this in my operations as well. So I'm seeing more discussion about IP strategy and IP developments in board meetings. We have one portfolio company that actually mandated an IP section in their board meeting agenda because of this. And prior to our funding, like they didn't even talk about much about their IP portfolio at these board meetings. There's also growing more sophistication in the kind of IP education that the employees of these portfolio companies are getting. One of our portfolio companies joined the Innovation Asset Collective. One, I guess they're like the IP head of IP has gone through the IAC, courses, and also is now actually doing even more advanced courses in IP protection, which again translates to better sophistication in how they're running the strategy in their business. We're seeing now companies going into M&A transactions, either as an acquirer or as an acquiree, but when they're acquiring companies, they're having real good sort of conversation about understanding the IP that they're now buying and how it then integrates into the strategy that they have. And then on the flip side, companies that may be in the process of selling are now being able to leverage the value that the IP portfolio that they have are, and now are using that to also identify, well, which are the likely buyers of this company. So I would say this is like a classic, I guess, a classic case of what gets measured gets managed. When you have a more purposeful way of investing into IP-rich companies, then it creates more IP awareness, more IP sophistication, and it sort of becomes that flywheel.
Yeah, and really, I mean, as you kind of describe it, IP is now really becoming that wireframe, right? In terms of your sort of structuring, sort of thoughts and sort of on the business side of things. So really interesting sort of to see that, evolution. I mean, one of the things I know that we have a couple of questions that have come in. I mean, one thing you've just touched upon, sort of, Lali, is sort of this measuring part. So I might skip to that one first because it's sort of timely in terms of how is everyone measuring successes? Sort of this cost and funds sort of spent versus the benefits and the outcomes and not outputs. And maybe I'll just leave that with all three of you to jump in on, just because it feels timely here.
Yeah, I can start. So we have kind of short-term and long-term target indicators or goals. In the short term, we measure funding going out, the number of patents, and then we track the patent numbers so that we can have a bit of an update on when the patent gets approved. But then we also have an agreement with StatsCan where we are looking at the impact on startups that received services through Elevate IP compared to a control group, so that we can see, are we actually making an impact on the success, the long-term viability of these startups in terms of overall revenue, hiring, number of employees. So we are trying to be able to show a long-term beneficial impact. That's a long-term play, though. Our program is 3 years old now. We've really only been fully in operation for about 1.5 years. So that's more of a long-term analysis. So in the short term, we're really focused on patents, copyrights, the number of people who've gone through, number of startups or BEs who received education opportunities, that kind of stuff. But we do have a long-term vision where we look at outcomes and see if we are having a beneficial impact on startups.
Yeah, IP is a really long game. So what you do now, you won't see, sometimes you see it very short term and you can attribute that outcome directly to the IP action. I filed this, I was able to have this conversation which secured that, and I know it's because of that action. But more often than not, IP, the return on those investments does take a while. In my area, since I practice in the area of biotechnology, it's a very long game. So depending on, if you want to attribute a specific outcome to IP, it is challenging to do that in the short term. Some programs measure it based on, an education was delivered to a company. They came back for more education at a higher level. They now have an in-house person that is specifically tasked with IP credentials, or they're moving forward on getting more capacity and competencies regarding IP. That company now has a strategy so that's a thing they measure. Now they do have a strategy. Have they filed IP? I mean, I don't think we only want to measure how many pieces of IP somebody has filed. That sometimes skews things, because you could file a whole lot of stuff and it doesn't mean a lot, right? Sometimes. What are you filing? Are you being strategic in your filing? Can you carry those filings? So I think it's important to understand that some of these IP actions are really hard to link to a very specific outcome later. But it really is a spectrum: education, strategy, a specific, security around IP, making sure companies understand, our employment agreements are reviewed. We actually own what our employees develop. That's a huge win for companies to understand that. and so building on those things, I think that's where we see it. That's the program that I've managed. That's where we saw those incremental shifts. We also measure things like how many full-time employees did you have? Did it increase over the past few years that we've supported you with IP? Has revenue increased? Can it be attributed to IP? These are the questions that we can ask, but these answers sometimes take more than 2 or 3 years to answer.
And then from our perspective, we really look at one big metric, and that's growth. But then it's measured in different ways. So there's financial growth, IP growth, and people growth. So I look at things from a financial growth perspective is, how has this investment made? How has this investment given the company's opportunity to accelerate their growth path, whether it be organically through I guess the products and services that they already have, or maybe the IP that they've created has allowed them to improve on these products and services, whether it be the second generation or a totally different product altogether that has even diversified their revenue streams. And then IP growth obviously is, are they maintaining the richness? Do they have that portfolio that will make them strong in the market, but at the same time will make them more valuable against their competitors or to possible acquirers, or just creates more leverage for them in the future. And then lastly, on the people growth, I think it's something that we always have to see. It's like, how has a greater level of IP sophistication and awareness been impacted in the company's employee base? And to Rula's point, are they also looking at IP from the perspective of not just technology, but also their legal contracts, the way they're marketing to their customers, all part and parcel of the growth that we're looking for from a financial, IP, and people perspective.
That's great. Thank you all. It kind of is also timely to jump into the next question here. And while it's a bit more tactical, I think it also speaks a little bit to where there might be some of these examples of sort of these sort of, cohesions amongst, the sort of the different programs and, what that might look like as a successful pathway for an org. So the question that comes up is, since any public disclosure of an invention before filing may make it impossible to obtain a patent, how does one, say, from a small business, discuss an invention after filing but before receiving the patent? So the kind of scenario is an example. One could discuss with an intellectual property advisor from CIPO, a client services center person somewhere else, NRC IRAP for small businesses, etc. So, from maybe Rula, if you want to take a stab at that, and then maybe collectively sort of what an example might be of a successful pathway of a collision there in a good way.
Yeah, perfect. So Jason, that's an excellent question. And I think it's very important for, the audience and innovators to recognize that 3 of the things that I'm going to talk about patents for a second now, because I think that's what this question really is about. If you want to file a patent application, it needs to have 3 things. It has to be new. That means new in the public. It can't be something in the public domain. And so it has to be not obvious, and it has to be useful. So those are the 3 things that every, patent that hopes to issue will have. So you want to talk with an investor, you want to share what you've done. Some people will say do it under an NDA. Fine. You get the person you're going to talk to sign a confidentiality agreement. You have that conversation. Maybe you need them to further develop it, whatever it is. But sometimes people don't respect the NDA. So you really need to make sure that who it is that you're sharing this with understands their legal obligations. Once it's out, it's out. Some of the individuals you noted in the question, you could reach out to them. IP professionals will be bound by, they won't share this. There's going to be a confidentiality in that. Some of the funding programs all across Canada, I know Jen's going to provide a list at the end and you can go into them. Go to the regional innovation center or accelerator in your area. They will connect you to a business, to an IP professional that you can have the secure conversation with. If for some whatever reason you've already talked about it on the news and it's in the media and you're an inventor and you've talked about that, there are some jurisdictions that have a grace period whereby you have a certain amount of time to file after it's in the public domain. Canada and US are 2 countries that have that grace period. It's a very limited grace period. So not all is lost if it's disclosed, but the individuals you mentioned, so the IP advisors at CIPO, they're not IP agents. I don't think they're agents or lawyers. But they do. I think there is that understood confidentiality between. You should definitely ask that before you share that with anybody. But if you go to the programs that we're talking about here, they will match you up to an IP professional, patent agent, or lawyer, and you can have these secure conversations with them. And you'll gauge that meeting with that professional to see if you want to talk more, if you want to, if there's the opportunity to work with them to build a strategy or for a patent filing. So there's a lot of opportunities to get that help.
Perfect. Matthew or Lali, is there anything else you'd like to jump in on?
I'm looking at the question from Robin, which is great. Obviously, I think we're all here to generate benefits or accrue benefits to the Canadian economy. And in now what we call the intangibles economy, it's even more important for us to look at IP as a valuable asset, to be able to not just create and commercialize products and services, but to compete, because we all have to understand that this world is more competitive, and other players, whether we like it or not, are using IP assets or IP portfolios or strategies to compete against other countries or other smaller players. And so it's, I guess it behooves us to make sure that we're increasing our understanding. We're going into the competitive market environment knowing that there are players there that are not looking out for our best interests, and it's to our benefit to be very savvy and very IP aware.
I think also as stewards of the public purse, we have to be very aware that the money that we spend is not ours. It belongs to the taxpayers, and that it has to be spent responsibly and with a purpose. And exactly that, like, our purpose is to try and fuel the economy, create jobs, and help the GDP. So that really ultimately is why we're all here.
Maybe I just say one thing, and I know we're getting to the end of the time, but I think it really bookends this conversation well. We started off talking about the IP strategy that Canada wanted to sort of start to generate, and it really is an innovator's market. It's an inventor's market. There are so many support programs. If anything, you take anything from this talk, is that there are a lot of programs that want to support the innovator, protect, own, leverage, strategize on their IP. So take advantage of those programs. They might not be around for long. Some of them only have 2 or 3 more years of shelf life. So if you are an innovator and you need help with your IP, there is going to be a whole list of programs that you're going to have access to. Find the one that works for you. You might be able to leverage more than one. And so we do try and work together. I know Lally and I work together on this as well. So, we might help you with awareness and strategy, and we might make a really a good introduction to another program to help, companies take full advantage of what Canada's trying to incentivize, which is in leveraging our innovations, owning our innovations, using them for the benefit of Canada and Canadians. So it's an investor's market. Know that there are programs here that want to support you, protect your innovations and leverage them.
Perfect. You've kind of hit it as we're going into sort of the last sort of minutes here, and a question to all of you three, 2 I guess kind of baked in is, one, as folks are kind of absorbing the breadth of what you all have covered, how they can prepare themselves, as kind of getting into that mindset. And I think also if you each can kind of share what's that key takeaway. I know, Rula, that might have been yours, but if there is something, one key takeaway for the audience, what that is, and I pose that to each of you three to kind of close us out.
I'll start. I mean, I think one of the things we also have to recognize is, so IP is created by people. There's no IP when there's no people. And so it's obviously intellectual property rights are a way of recognizing the ingenuity, creativity, and the brilliance of the talent that we have. We have to treat good people well, actually all people well. And if we develop them, we educate them, we will create good IP. And so I think IP awareness and education is for everyone. And the more companies realize this early on, the more they will benefit from the value and the leverage that they can get.
Definitely, I'll jump in real quick too. The one message that I would want to make sure anyone gets from this presentation is it is about awareness and education. I think there's a lot offered. There's a lot more needed in terms of education. If I would strongly encourage anybody who might be qualified to as an SME or as a startup to seek out those opportunities. And I know for Elevate IP there are lunch and learns, information sessions, webinars, but there's also one-on-one mentorship available where they put you directly in touch with an IP professional. That really is the key, and they can help make some very important decisions in terms of the best way to go. Is it time? Is it not yet time? Do we move ahead with a strategy? Once that's done, what's next? And I think IP has to be central to a lot. I mean, obviously there are exceptions, but anything in terms of innovation, IP has to be a central component of the development, the thought process.
Perfect. Thank you. You know what? I think you all collectively have shared so much with us, a lot to digest in a really good way. I mean, I think as I'm leaving this, there is really kind of this mindset of and reassurance of you are not alone. I think in all the ways that you have touched upon this, regardless sort of where one sits in an organization, from the smallest sort of, to the largest, is something that needs to really be sort of top of mind. And really sort of demystifying that. So on behalf of Digital, as I hand it back to Zane, thank you so much. Merci for your time, for carving out, these insights that is really valuable. And we will share these nuggets that you have provided with us, with the audience, and help to continue to support this development, this growth, protection, and leveraging of Canadian IP that is powerhouse, as you guys all say. We are such a powerhouse in so many ways, and let's continue to champion that. So I'll hand it to Zane. Thank you all so much again. Merci.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you once again for joining the webinar today, hosted by Digital and our wonderful Director of IP, Jen. All those attending today will receive a follow-up email in the next couple of days with any resources discussed throughout this session. And that's it from us at Digital, and we'll see you at our next webinar session. Goodbye.